Hello and welcome to our latest edition of Path to Power. I'm Matt Cooper.
And I'm Ivan Yates.
Ivan, have you ever seen MTV Cribs?
No, I haven't even heard of it.
Oh my God, the cultural reference is lost in you. MTV Cribs used to be where celebrities would be brought and they would show around their luxury homes and the camera would go through.
Oh, that's it. Yeah, but I heard of Cribs, but not the bit before you said Cribs.
MTV was music television.
Oh, sorry, yes,
it was
yes.
the channel which started
actually, I
Cribs.
have seen it. I have bit boring.
Well, I have an idea for a spin-off for Oireachtas TV. Oireachtas TV Cribs.
Stop right there.
Right, so basically Oireachtas TV Cribs. Now, it could be a TD or a senator, although they probably wouldn't want to be associated with it. Maybe it could be an Office of Public Works official, or maybe one of the expensive PR people that they like to hire, can give a guided tour to the bicycle shed, or the old tuck shop, which is now used to accommodate cameras for RT and for Virgin Media, or the new Department of Finance security hut. I'm sure you've seen the pictures. It's got a lovely roof on it, hasn't it? This lovely copper-shaped roof on it. What the hell goes on inside in the environs of Leinster House? Is it the most pampered place on the earth? That, okay, the politicians are saying, you go off and do what you do, the Office of Public Works, and they spend a fortune knowing that these are the entitlements to which politicians become accustomed.
Matt, have I not taught you anything in the past year? Don't sweat the small stuff. I mean, I'm looking at a big picture, a budget bazooka of 10 billion. And here are you, cribbing and moaning like the rest of the media, about $1 million here, $1 million there. Like Haughey said you'd lose $1 million in a tot. Now we'd lose $1 billion in a tot. So I get the public anger about that. I think Bikegate was the worst of them. But the serious point I would make is this, that since 2020, in the private and public sector, every building contract that was signed actually cost 40% more. I actually had a session this week with a senior partner specialising in contract law as regards the construction sector. The costs of steel, cement and everything all went up. And there is massive litigation, like there is going to be between BAM and the National Children's Hospital, which is the biggest ticket item of that. But what I'm just trying to say is there is a common factor here that everything that was tendered at a price that took 2 or 3 years to deliver, and I'm not saying it should in some of those cases, they ended up uniformly costing 40% more.
And the 40% is interesting because let me give you a few more figures. The refurbishment of Leinster House overall, which started in 2017, was supposed to cost 8 million quid. The initial phase ended up costing 17 million quid, so you're more than double. Mm-hmm. And then they decided they hadn't done enough. So do you know what the full bill is coming in at? 42 million quid for the refurbishment.
But was there design creep? In other words, now that you suggest we could have this done in a different stone or a different, design creep is usually a big factor.
We're talking about things like just actually remediation works on the roof and things like putting in structural supports and stuff. So, that's not necessarily...
But what price do you put on democracy?
But hold on a second. I mean, even Michael McDowell has been bringing up, you had a library inside in the Oireachtas and that was gutted. And it's sort of like this IKEA-type furniture has gone in, although I'm sure it hasn't gone into IKEA-type prices. So this is the thing is, I suppose what people are looking at is, and they look at that's more than 40% to go from 8 million to 42 million. The National Children's Hospital, now I think there's a pair of them in it.
Yeah.
And we have to be very careful because BAM can be very aggressive.
I was a bit banned this week.
Were you?
They were one of my people.
Right. They can be a bit aggressive and threatening of litigation if you say anything that they don't like. So,
well, they do have a side to the story.
I started this by saying there are 2 of them in it.
I'm not defending them, actually.
There are 2 of them in it, right? And there's a degree of, I have to choose my words carefully here for legal reasons, but underperformance, shall we say, on the part of the state. And then I'm amazed by the fact that BAM, if they have so much problems finishing the Children's Hospital, how do they manage to get the Intel facility done on time and apparently on budget?
Yeah, Alistair is a good friend of mine and he is the executive director for Ireland and the UK, and he tells me that there are 2 sides to the story. I didn't really engage with him because I didn't want publicity for that.
But can I make a bet? Yeah. 2 wrongs don't make a right.
Oh, yeah, I know.
I'd say both of them
so
are
there was
in the
design
creep.
Like, who constructed that contract in the beginning bears a lot of responsibility. But there is no question, there is a central point here is, if this was your money or my money as opposed to public money, people treat it differently. And it is grossly disrespectful and taking the taxpayer for granted. And as a general point, you're absolutely right. There is a complete disrespect for taxpayers' resources.
And then, just to extend it a little bit further, it makes me wonder when I hear an awful lot of the political promises being made in advance of the general election. And particularly, and this is something for parties of the left to consider, where they think that more state investment or state involvement is the solution for everything, when you actually look at when the state is in charge of doing things, that it tends to lose control of costs. So, for example, some of the parties of the left are talking about having a national building or construction company. Now, can you imagine if we had just the one building construction company which would have the responsibility for building tens of thousands of houses and apartments each year? It would be a complete and unmitigated disaster.
There is another point. Sometimes the cheapest tender doesn't cost the least. Do you understand me? In other words,
it's a starting point.
Yeah, no, they go in low to get the contract and know they can't be shifted out. And I actually think they have a thing called in Britain called the NEC contract. It's an engineering contract that actually allows certain flexibilities and so on. And actually, I find both builders and customers, clients, actually prefer that. And there's been a lot of calls to change the format of the contract. But what happens in some cases, people go in cheap, get the contract, and it ends up costing a lot more.
But you remember probably when we were doing the TV show together that the National Children's Hospital was a story we covered on many nights. And do you remember at the time, back in 2019, the hole in the ground had been built, or dug, shall I say.
And there was a big row about the site choice.
There was a big row. Well, that's another issue.
Yeah.
That's a sort of redundant issue at this stage.
No, but the point is the underground digging was more needed there in that intense site beside James's than it would have been in Blanchardstown for Connolly's.
But the point is that when they got to the stage where all that work had been done, they already knew that the costs were starting to spiral out of control. And you remember BAM offered to walk away, knowing, I'd say, full well that there was no chance of finding an alternative contractor at that stage, given that amount of work had been done to take over the project from there, and it would have delayed it years. But there's something very odd going on. I mean, the figures are just incredible now.
It's the biggest hospital most expensive hospital in the world.
And then you have the situation whereby the finishing date has been changed something like 4 times in the last year, 14 times in total.
Well, I keep remembering, people aren't old enough to remember when Beaumont in Hoy's time was the equivalent of the National Children's Hospital. It actually lay idle. The construction was finished because there was such a row about contracts and staffing and consultants and so on. Don't rule out.
Oh, sorry, that's already been highlighted as a possibility.
Yeah. So even once the builders and every engineer and every fitter has left the building, there could still be further delays.
Well, they should be already putting in place the transfer of staff from Crumlin and from Temple Street and was one other location, and they should be getting ready. But that's going to cause all sorts of problems. Staffing, doctors, nurses, and then all the things, where are they going to live, all the rest of it.
A safe bet. I'll be getting a bus pass before the hospital is actually operational.
Yeah, but you're due your bus pass in a year's time, Ivan. We know that.
October.
That's the safest bet you can ever offer.
They're not saying October 26th, but I'm saying it could be then.
Okay. All right. How do you think that all of this controversy feeds into the potential general election date? Because I know the weather Thursday, Dublin, was miserable. The rain pouring in, and you're going, why in the name of God have they waited until the winter to actually have an election, be it in November or be it next February? The weather is going to be potentially grim. You never know what way it'll turn out on a particular day. But also, if people are now getting, again, pissed off with this waste of money, and even if it's officials who are responsible, it's the politicians and extension the government who are going to get the blame, aren't they?
And particularly Deeper. Deeper has to, all public expenditure, the buck stops with Pascal Donoghue. It stops with David Maloney, Secretary General of that department. And, there's no complication about that. You could have OPW in the first instance, but everybody is answerable to Deeper. But to answer your question, when 2 or more politicos are gathered together these days, there is nothing else they talk about but the timing of the election. So I've been receiving texts and tidbits and gossip and so on to say that the RDS was booked on the 8th of, that they'd actually hold the election, you know, because you said you had a problem, you're going to the Aviva on the 8th. They would actually hold it on the Thursday, the 7th, and so on. What I'm now getting is a consistent barrage of texts saying the election will be held on the 22nd of November.
That late?
I think that's the last date. I think the good Dáil will be, in other words, the bits and pieces of legislation they wanted to get through the week of Tuesday, the 23rd of October, they hope to have it done. So, all of this is Harris being dragged screaming and kicking into it. The latest thing being, now that he's getting his ticking the box exercise of getting to the White House, he's happier to go. That may or may not be true.
So how did that actually happen, I wonder?
Well, at the UN, they were out there, you know, with the good and the great for that week that they do it.
I know, but I mean, like that
and I'd say, is there any chance I could drop over?
Well, yeah, I know. That's what I was just thinking. I mean, like, does somebody else sort of in the way that they?
Will he do the pint like he did with Starmer?
Yeah, or will he bring his bowl of shamrock like they do in Patrick's Day?
I thought you were going to say a bowl of something else.
I don't know where your mind thinks, Ivan, but anyway. But yeah, it did strike me a bit like the way getting Joe Biden in for the early debate to get rid of him. Did certain government officials manage to get Simon Harris an invite to the White House to get rid of the March excuse, to make him feel good about himself? And also, will they use the photographs then of himself and Joe Biden for electioneering purposes?
And at that stage, if it is the 22nd, we'll have the cards face up in terms of the next president. But some of the arguments why Harris has persuaded Fianna Fáil to get a little bit more time instead of early November, late November, is some of the, what I call convention chaos. The truth of it is, in fairness to Olwen Enright and to Simon Harris and his apparatchiks, nothing was done for Fine Gael to prepare for the election before Leo stepped down. There was no candidates really. There was James Gogan, but sorry, by the way, someone said to me, Ivan, when you definitely know the election will be called, will be the week that Kate O'Connell is added in Dublin Bay South. That is actually seen by everybody as Harris's final trigger, because she will be his pony in that race. But what we're looking at
Sorry, can I tell you something else? Just, I happen to know the Fine Gael candidates had their photographs taken this week.
Yeah, and for the posters and all that, yeah.
And the posters have been printed next week.
But the reason why they needed more time is, you take Mayo. I mean, Ciara Keogh, who is the pony put forward in Westport by Michael Ring to take his seat, they're now going to have 4 candidates in Mayo. Like, they are in absolute chaos in some areas. They added it. We were in Cork South Central. They've added Jerry Buttermore, who they didn't want to run. At the convention, they selected 2. They've ended up with 3.
So why
get one seat, ostensibly.
Why did they add him, though?
Because Bishopstown has moved from, which is his home area, where he could have, Art O'Leary was telling me this of the Electoral Commission, a genius when it comes to, he did the redraw of the constituency. Yeah. He was adamant that it was just maths and geography. There was all desktop. They didn't take in representations from anyone. And, you know, in Cork North Central, the way Mallow has been moved in and Ballincollig changed and so on, there's a lot of bad feeling about, and feeling that it'll be changed again in the future. But overall, I think they did a good job. But my point is this, that a lot of these new Fine Gael candidates and the addition of more candidates, I think they've now reached their quota of 40% women. They have particular problems, and Fianna Fáil have a few additions. So they needed a few extra weeks, other than the loose ends of legislation. They needed that to get from calling the election straight after the budget, which is the 1st of October, between the 1st and the 10th, to moving it back to somewhere around the 23rd. But I am in absolutely no doubt that Fianna Fáil have said, look, we want to do this together. We want to do it in unison. We want 35% transfers. We want to do it all again. So we have to agree. It's not just your call, the calling of the election. And I think that has prevailed with Harris.
I wonder how much unison there is, because, again, I noticed this week, another odd one from Micheál Martin. Do you remember how I brought up recently he'd been giving out about how Cork city centre wasn't safe? He's now saying the same about Dublin not being safe. He said that there's another little dig at Helen McEntee behind the scenes. So But also, they've been in government for 4 years. I mean, can they actually literally Fianna Fáil say, oh, it's not safe, and sort of say, well, that's because Fine Gael held the Department of Justice?
There are many loveless marriages in this country. What keeps them together? Power. The idea of the Shinners getting next or near power will drive Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael into the tightest possible embrace.
Okay. Budget next week, next Tuesday. And we'll talk about that in next Friday's podcast as well. The expectations, I mean, so much of this has been leaked, but some things need to be still confirmed. I'm interested in the one that Heather Humphreys apparently wants to give a bigger increase to pensioners than to other social welfare recipients.
Yes, and just before we move off that, the hate speech thing with Helen was another Fianna Fáil saying, no, we're not doing this. Go ahead now and just reform the bill. We mightn't even pass the bill. But that was an example of what you just said about Helen in terms of the city centre crime.
Yeah, but I mean, I have an issue with that, in that I think that's giving in to the loudmouths on the extremes, and that they should have... Maybe they needed to tighten things up in relation to the definitions of what hate speech is, but we have an awful lot of hateful speech going on, which isn't necessarily dealt with in existing legislation. They actually have managed to do it in other countries. I don't know why we couldn't do it here, but it was a small vocal lobby from the extreme left and the extreme right who have managed to do this down. And I think when you consider as well with things like what we saw in the RTE Primetime Investigates documentary last Thursday week of the types involved hatefully and claiming, oh, we're just speaking up for the rights of ordinary concerned citizens. No, there are people who are just utter racist, xenophobic, homophobic gobshites, and they speak hatefully and they wind others up to do their evil bidding for them.
So you've actually put your finger now on the fault line between you and me. You see every issue through the prism of what is the right thing to do, what is the fair thing to do, what is the proper thing to do. I see everything through the prism of what is politically pragmatic, and to hell with the rights and wrongs.
So transactional, isn't it?
Exactly. I mean, and so the transaction here is what will carry the least electoral downside, and they don't want to fight an election on hate speech. They want to kill the issue.
See, is that why you gave out last week in the podcast about Holly Kearns and her performance in Cork, in that you felt that she was perhaps a little bit too idealistic in the way that she wanted to go about her politics? She's not transactional, and maybe that's why she's appealing to a younger generation who perhaps are a little bit more idealistic rather than your cynical approach to things.
And in fairness, Holly took exception to what I had to say, not on the night, but in the subsequent podcast, the mainline podcast. So she feels that she should have a right to reply in terms of playing the original content.
That's available only to subscribers. So subscribers actually have heard both the Dublin and Cork shows available to them. But do you know what I'll do? Maybe what we'll do is...
I said I'd ask you as editor to do something.
I said what we will do is we will play at the end of the podcast, say a couple of minutes from Holly in Cork. And then if people want to hear more,
their own mind. That's what she said.
Go to the subscription edition. Okay, the budget. So let's go back. So why should pensioners get more than people who are out of work, who might have higher bills to pay?
Well, one of the things that Arthur Leary, the Electoral Commission, they did a post-poll research of those who voted and those who didn't vote. It's 50%. Yeah. And it's quite clear that the disadvantaged, the disaffected, the unemployed don't vote. Pensioners do vote, and in droves. So that's why.
You give money to those who are going to vote.
Absolutely. That's the realpolitik of now. Of course, there's social justice, and they're on fixed incomes, and they have extra needs. That's all the violin stuff.
I think it's basic human needs, and people have to pay for things, Ivan. They will get an increase, but it won't be as much of an increase. Now, the tax thing is the other thing which I suppose is going to be the big focus of attention. The latest suggestions is that for anybody, the first 70,000 of income, the amount of USC charge on that will be reduced by 1%. I suspect the government is going to have to do something that is significantly obvious on the USC, particularly with Sinn Féin coming out with its alternative budget, in which they're promising to, not immediately, the headline suggested abolition of all USC for those earning under 45,000. It would actually be under 30,000 in the first year, and it would build over the lifetime of the government to 45,000. However, the point there's a couple of interesting points, is that Sinn Féin clearly is targeting lower income. It's almost like it's not bothering now with middle income workers anymore, that it's just trying to solidify its base in relation to that. But that might be very popular on the basis that people do not like the USC.
Well, so again, I'm looking at the politics of the budget. Okay, you'll hear a lot about families, a lot about workers, and the reason why the budget will be 100% leaked after Monday, when the leaders sign off on the last bits of it, is that each party wants to claim credit for A, B and C amongst their spinning people. So it like poor Jack will have nothing left to say on Tuesday.
And Pascal, remember there's two budget speeches.
Fair point. Now, the first thing to know about the budget, this is a completely different budget because it's a bazooka budget in which the bullets being fired for populism go beyond the conventional social welfare tax and so on, because there's three other bazookas they're going to fire. The first is the sale of AIB shares of 3 billion. They're putting that into the budget, and it's going to announce a package really badly needed, about 400 million for sanitary services. The tenders are coming to a halt.
This is Irish Water.
Yeah, Irish Water just don't have the money, so there's going to be an infusion of that, and to be presented as a housing package of infrastructure. You can't have housing without it. The second thing is the National Training Fund, 2 billion, which has been, we've discussed this previously, accruing. And of course, the third thing is the Apple money, whereby they will do it. So what you're going to have is not only a tsunami of 10 billion that's going to be released into the economy between extra spending and taxes, above the line and below the line. You're going to have three other items of once-offs thrown in. So, put it like this. I think there's a song called Money Can't Buy You Love, but we're going to find out if money can buy you votes, because that's what's coming our way.
Do you know who sang that song?
Ralph someone?
God,
no.
You're culturally inept.
I care less, but carry on. Who sang it?
The Beatles.
Did they?
Money Can't Buy You Love is the Beatles.
All right, okay. Well, that's okay. Well, now that you say it, but I think a lot of people have done covers on it since.
That'd be true. And I suppose you grew up and were served in an era, Simply Red's Money's Too Tight to Mention, which you probably don't know that one either. But I still want to come back to the budget and what's in the budget. And
Someone gave out to me, said, what's wrong with Matt Cooper? He went to some concert, it was a Coldplay, and it was fantastic. And here he was nitpicking about the audio quality of that. I said, well, that's Matt for you. Look what I've got to put up with.
Some people have given out.
Is that true? Did you?
I did. I did. I didn't enjoy Coldplay like the 79,000 other people did. I'm not a fan of Coldplay particularly. I was told that the show could be wonderful.
I think that's musical snobbishness, really.
I tell you what I did see last weekend, which was magnificent, was Hamilton, which is the story.
Oh, right.
You might actually like it as politics, but the rap might be a bit fast for you to keep up with. But anyway, that's a completely, by the way. The thing when you say about the AIB money and the Apple money and the other...
The National Training Fund,
And the National Training Fund will go, to my understanding, is into third level education, which is exceptionally badly needed, and apprenticeships. So that's fine. I can understand the reasoning behind that, although my argument there would be as well, with the Apple money, that a big chunk should go into student accommodation, as I said, and I would help other accommodation modes. However, this comes back to, IFAC, the Irish Fiscal Advisory Council, will warn, don't spend too much money quickly or it'll be inflationary, blah, 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 and the rest of it. And that's about, but I think the point that people will look at is, because going back to the bicycle shed and going back to the security shed.
Value for money.
Value for money. Will you trust these people to actually spend all of this money on our behalf? We need to take a break. For those who are not subscribers, well, we have to have a bit of advertising to help pay the bills for producing these podcasts. But we will be back to discuss other things in relation to the budget. In particular, I'm interested by Peter Burke's continued campaign in relation to 9% VAT for the hospitality sector. We'll talk about that and lots of other issues in the second part of Path to Power after this. Welcome back to Path to Power, and let's continue with the budget, Ivan, because what is Peter Burke playing at, the Minister for Enterprise and Employment, when he has had it pointed out to him very clearly by Pascal Donoghue and by Jack Chambers to the summer economic statement that there is only so much money available for tax. The tax is going to be dedicated, as we've already said, to the USC and also to indexation of the bands and whatever to help people's personal. So there's very little left in relation to tax. And he keeps giving succor to the tourism and hospitality sector that we get the VAT rate down from 13.5% to 9%. I know he can afterwards say, I tried my best and the rest of it. But it's a good politics to try to bring in something that you can't deliver.
Well, when I'm occasionally training politicians, I always say to them, if you can't give good news, and there are situations where you don't have good news, you must pour the empathy button. In other words, that the empathy, I feel your pain, I'm with you, I'm doing your best. Fine Gael would love to do more on inheritance tax, the threshold's going up to 400,000, but those devils in greens won't let us do that. So what I think he's doing, because I don't think the VAT rate is going to be changed, there is a pathway whereby you take out takeaways and you take out hotels and you just do it for restaurants. I don't know if the revenue commissioners don't want to do this, if that's a possibility. Was it 3 Wagamama? The press up group. Yeah, no, but the point is this: like, if people like them are feeling the pinch, you know what I mean? It is absolutely endemic. Some of the problems.
Well, I think that there was over expansion in the press up group, and they drove their own costs up too high. And look, what happened in the press group came as a surprise to nobody in the restaurant and hospitality sector. So I wouldn't take them, but there are. I think it's been 600 plus restaurants and cafes that have shut over the last year. I can't remember the exact number, but it is a particularly big number. And I'm sympathetic to the restaurants. I mean, their food costs, for example, have gone up dramatically. So it is quite shocking at times if you go into even a small cafe or small restaurant for something pretty basic to see the prices. But I understand for the owners of those places who work hard on very thin margins, their input costs, food, electricity, all those things have gone up enormously. And I don't think, to be honest, a change in the VAT back to 9% would actually make an enormous amount of difference.
So I think he will have some good news from them on a deferral of increases of the living wage plan and the minimum wage. But I was over since our last recording in Ballinrobe, and you have those rural towns, that one in South Mayo, where the vacancy rate of the high street is 30%. We need to reimagine these to put residences into them. The dereliction in provincial towns. Yeah, no, it just has to be done. But like what I think is going to happen is where it'll land for Peter Burke is rates relief.
But rates
are quite high.
There's so many things where I think we're in danger of economic self-harm at the moment. The tour industry, or the Irish Tourism Industry Confederation, had a conference during the week as well. And I interviewed Ona Mara Walsh, its representative, on the last word about this. And one of the things that came up, there's 77,000 less hotel rooms available, right? Because of all the rooms that were given over in relation to immigrants and refugees.
Planning refused for a big hotel beside the Marion. Did you see that last week? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know about the particular circumstance of that, but the idea as well that we had a few years ago, Dublin City Councillor saying we have enough hotels in Dublin. No, we do not have enough hotels in Dublin. And because we need more hotels, because we're short of hotel rooms, then more Airbnbs, and that interferes with the availability of rented accommodation on a normal residential basis. We have issues in relation as well to input flights coming in. I mean, this bizarre handicapping thing of ourselves, Dublin Airport. I know this thing's been running now for months, the complaints and the rest of it. And I see the Dublin Airport are doing some clever thing.
It's going to be raised to 40 million.
Well, sorry.
The council are going to the ground.
But that's the planning thing. But my argument in relation to that would be is that you need some sort of... The Green Minister, Eamon Ryan, and the other Greens say it's not possible to do anything. There's no government intervention. I wonder, is it not possible to give some temporary derogation for temporary breaking of the cap before the planning decision is made? And the problem that's happening now in relation to the planning out there as well is that... I mean, you see, Dublin Airport cleverly are saying that, well, UEFA are now worried about having matches coming in 2028 for the Euro Championships because they can't offer additional charter flights into Dublin Airport. Your beloved Leinster rugby team is having to fly out of Belfast Airport. I think they should have been insistent on going through Shannon.
Take the ferry.
Take the ferry. But there's all these incredible... I'm aware of another airline, for example, which runs 14 flights a week out of Dublin, right? 2 flights a day, and it's had a letter from the Irish Aviation Authority telling it to reduce its capacity by 5%.
Yeah,
so you know what, that's 0.7 of a flight. So what are we saying to that airline, right? Effectively means it has to get rid of one of its 14 flights of the week. So there it is offering. It just pick a day, and if it does, then it loses the slot which can go and be taken back. It's nuts.
I
we
hear
need to look.
the minute Eamon Ryan goes out of that department, that problem is going to be solved. But before we move off of the budget, you're going to hear a lot about families and the cost of living. The two major things will be a double payment of child benefit and €1.5 billion spent on cost of living, which will be a universal electricity credit of €250, less than the 2.3 billion last year. The point is this, Matt, and this is a genuine point. There are people in this country who are genuinely on the poverty line. All these universal credits give you and me the same benefit as someone who's trying to live on €200 a week.
Right.
It's not right. And I actually think that because the state is just so awash with money that they're pursuing policies like universal schemes, which they say for administrative reasons they can't do, target. The fact of the matter is it is actually not necessary in some cases.
Well, then what do you make of Sinn Féin's alternative budget, where they had things like, as I said earlier, taking people under the 30,000 threshold out of the USC, then bringing that up to 45,000. A solidarity tax of additional 3% on incomes of over 145,000. Even though the oversight body, what's the name of it? Sort of the finance watchdog, the parliamentary oversight.
The budget oversight committee. Yeah.
Has pointed out that 79% of all income taxes are already paid by the top 20% of earners. So there's already a highly progressive tax system which Sinn Féin wants to load more onto people on higher. And that's its political position, and that's a worthy position for it. But I wonder how popular will it be with people, as I come back to what I said earlier, that Sinn Féin is now just deciding to nail down the lower ground rather than the middle ground. So
I would say when John Hogan, the Secretary General of the Department of Finance, and Dave Maloney say to ministers, are you really going to, at an economy that's tilting along at max capacity, you're going to throw 10 billion of current, sweeteners, extra spending, and you're going to spend another 20 billion of capital fund. They say, my dear boy, how would you like to be dealing with Pierce Doherty? This is the price of keeping the shinners out. And actually, that is getting some traction at the higher levels.
Well, I see, also talking about economic self-harm, and tourism, I think, accounts for 13% of the economy or employment in the economy. It's very important. And we are handicapping ourselves by putting limits on the numbers of people who come in through Dublin Airport. And the idea that the airlines will be diverted to Cork and to Knock and to Shannon simply doesn't hold up. They just want to use Dublin, and you can't force the airlines.
And it's the very same with the OPR, which is the Office of Planning Regulator, thinking you could suppress housing in the Greater Dublin area and East Coast, and people will go live elsewhere. It just does not work. It does not work.
And it's not happening. And that brings us to data centres, because I wrote about this for the Business Post last week. I thought one of the most highly significant stories of the last couple of weeks is what's happening at Amazon. So Amazon is one of our major corporate taxpayers in this country. Now, you can have issues with the damage that Amazon has done to retailing, and all those hollowed out towns and cities we're talking about, a lot of the time is because people, instead of going into shops, are ordering from Amazon and having stuff delivered. And there's an Amazon.ie website will be available for next year. Recently, Amazon celebrated 20 years in Ireland, and the likes of Enterprise Ireland came along and congratulated it for helping Irish companies sell via the Amazon platform and all that sort of stuff. However, the more significant story is Amazon had used Ireland as a base for Amazon Web Services, the cloud. This is a far more important part of Amazon,
AWS,
rather than the what we get our stuff delivered to our house from. And they had used Ireland, and they have invested heavily in data centres in Ireland, and they employ about 6,000 people in Ireland as well. They have, because of generative AI and the possibilities been opened up by that, and because of the pressures put on the cloud, they need more data centres. They need to invest in it. They have a $35 billion budget for Europe. None of it is coming to Ireland. They have decided the English, the British are, come in, let's do it. $9 billion investment in Britain. Germany, other parts. Even though Ireland, from a climate change point of view, is the best location for data centres. We now are saying, we don't want any more data centres, or we're not producing enough electricity for them. This is economic self-harm potentially. This means that in future, those corporation tax rates on which we have come to depend could dry up. And it's like we want to have our cake and eat it. There are certain things we have. And you could say that, okay, well, no, we don't want so much electricity generation being diverted to data centres. But the cloud and the AI is what will give us the various savings in the future in relation, and will deal with climate change issues. But the real problem is we are putting our corporation tax revenues at risk by failing to deliver the electricity for these data centres.
I think write it down. 2024 was the turning point of what I call the flight of the golden geese. I spoke at length to Neil Morris last Tuesday at the CIF conference about Amazon.
And Neil Morris is
the boss of
of
country
AWS.
lead. He's got a country lead, but he's also in charge of the investment you spoke about with AWS. And he has spent the last 20 years of his life building up centres in Blanchardstown and elsewhere. And he was actually talking to Colin Construction and others, companies that they've used Irish construction. And actually, if they go abroad, those companies might follow them. And he actually explained in clear terms that he was leaving the conference to go to Saragossa. And he said the welcome in Italy and Spain for data centres. Not only is there not a ban on them, but in Ireland, but there's actually a solution, whether they have solar power, they have a grid that works. The argument, because on Thursday I was doing an electricity conference, which we'll come back to, but the argument amongst everybody is, well, several years ago, 4% of our total electricity consumption was from the tech sector. It's gone up to 21%, and even if you don't stop the rot, it's going to go to 50%. And I said, yeah, but the solution to electricity crisis is more electricity. We have the wind, we have the way of doing this. And the fact of the matter is, Eamon Ryan instigated a policy of a ban on data centres. And it's not just going to be Amazon. It's going to be Microsoft. It's going to be Google. All of these with their generative AI plans are going to say, thank you, but I can actually get the infrastructure I need. So what we're going to see now is this year, 30 billion of tax receipts from CPT. What we're actually going to see is Seamus Coffey and the IFAC are going to be vindicated. And when we look back in 2035, when did it all go wrong? It was around this time that the worm turned because of data centres.
And I'll give you another example. Microsoft, which is also massive in Ireland and one of our biggest data centres providers, it is involved with BlackRock, the giant American fund. They have set up a $30 billion investment, which they're leveraging to $100 billion to build data centres, mainly in America, but they're looking to Europe as well. They won't come near us probably because of this. But the thing is, here's a slightly different angle on it. Do you know what Microsoft is doing in the United States to get the power? It's looking to build its own mini nuclear facilities, right? And even things like taking over 3 Mile Island in the old famous one from the 1970s. We here in Ireland should be looking at the potential for building small nuclear plants. Now, people go, oh my God, that'd be a dreadful thing to do environmentally. Actually, environmentally, nuclear is the cleanest way of producing electricity.
It's decarbonised, yeah.
You actually are not producing carbon emissions. It is the safest way to do things. But we have it written into law here in Ireland that nuclear can never be actually manufactured, power can never be manufactured in Ireland. It's the ultimate in hypocrisy because our interconnectors are taking in nuclear-generated electricity from France and from Britain, but we want to be pure. We want to do it ourselves here in Ireland. And we are going to shoot ourselves in the foot. This is hubris and complacency. And I know people say, well, you don't want to be bending over backwards on behalf of the foreign multinationals, but, you know, they're giving us a hell of a lot of corporation tax money and employment, and we need them to pay for everything. So we need to generate the electricity, put the grid in place, and have these data centres.
Even worse. These are smart guys, right? They said to Mr. Government, I'll tell you what, okay, if you can't provide us with the electricity in the context of EirGrid is a monopoly supplier of the transmission system and ESB Networks is a monopoly supplier of the distribution system. So you cannot have, receive or get electricity in this country without them. So they said, I'll tell you what you do. do what they've done in America and other countries where there was a state monopoly, allow a facility of what's called private wires. And they said, we will build our own generating facility, we will run a wire, and you know what we'll even do? After 10 years, we'll give it back to the state. And they said, no, we're not really that interested in that level of trouble. Like, you couldn't make it up.
Okay. Actually, there's a bone I have to pick with you, though.
Yeah.
You know, you've been banging on in this podcast over the last year about how difficult it is to get planning permission to build apartments and houses and things like that. 2
big ones during the week. Do you see Blackrock? Unbelievable. Overdevelopment. Some biddy beside it objected on the ground. Like, it's right on the dark line.
Excuse me. She exercised her democratic right as allowed. And if anyone feels they've been identified by what Ivan said there, we apologise to that person. That's just Ivan going off.
No, it's a group of them. It's not a single individual. It's a group of elderly people who just do not want an apartment built beside them. I'm sorry. We have to make...
Would you like apartments built beside your house down in Enniscorthy?
Like you make a choice on where you live. And if you live inside the M50, you can expect intensive development.
Well, indeed, and in fairness, in the area I live in, there's been considerable intensive development, and we have things like an immigration centre and all the rest of it and stuff, and I'm not complaining about that. However, the bone that I want to pick with you is all these poor builders and we can't get planning permission.
Can't get zoned land.
There's planning permission for 50,000 apartments in Dublin alone, which they haven't used. Yeah. So there we have it.
I can explain that.
Just give me a second. I know you want to get your builder's hat on in relation to this and stuff, but... I know exactly the excuses you're going to give me. I know exactly the economic arguments you're going to make. However, the thing is that you complain, we can't get planning permission, but when you get the planning permission, you are not activating it. And if those 50,000 apartments had been built, it would do an awful lot. It would take an awful lot of the pressure and the heat out of both the rental and purchase markets.
Okay, I'll answer that, but there's another thing is after emerging. There was about 900 houses in Wicklow that actually got planning permission eventually, and you couldn't make this up. The zoning lasted for 5 years, and the zoning ran out, and the planning permission was forfeit.
That's nuts.
No, that is just. There are 2 particular schemes. I think one is in Rathnew and the other's in Bray. You just could not make some of this stuff up. The fact of the matter is, you go put a crane in the sky, you put precast concrete, you build an apartment. You cannot sell, so a group of 50 apartments, 300 apartments, you cannot sell the first one until you've built the last one. That's the cash flow. Whereas if I build a scheme of 400 houses, I can do 50 at a time, sell them, use the cash flow and moving along. So that's the first thing. The government have long recognised that some of the costs, you can actually imagine the logistics of some of these intense sites, in terms of access and so on. And there's off-site construction and all of these developments. So Darragh O'Brien introduced a scheme called Croí Cónaithe, which gives a subsidy. And actually, the policy document you love, that of Owen O'Brien, said he would give a subsidy for compact inner city development of up to 150,000 a unit. So it's a recognised fact. If you want to get these over the line and if you want to make them affordable, it requires a public subsidy. So suck that up and build them.
Ivan, when it comes to commercial, the construction commerciality wants state subsidies.
Do you want them built or not? Do you want the homes or not?
I understand. I'm not arguing against it.
Now, the Labour Party.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you about. You have been interested in the potential in the general election for the Labour Party because there are some people who are suggesting, is it possible that they be left with just 2 or 3 seats or any at all? This party that in 2011 was looking for the Gilmore Gale to sweep it into leadership of the next government, which of course didn't happen.
Okay, so 2014 under Joan Burton was the low point. It was a local election year and Labour got wiped out. They subsequently got wiped out in the 2016 general election, and to vote Labour was simply toxic. You'll be aware of the marches and protests about water rates. Alan Kelly was minister, all of that good stuff. But I came away from the Opera House in Cork, because I have to think about these things as well as talk about them. I was looking at the microcosm of Cork South Central. So there's an extra seat. It's gone from 4 to 5. And you can actually say right now the 4 seats will go to Fianna Fáil, McGrath's brother, Micheál Martin. Fine Gael will get 1 seat, whoever that is, and Donegal O'Leary will get a seat. So who's going to get
Sinn Féin?
Yeah, who's going to get the next seat? So will Sinn Féin get 3, don't really think so. But in the hunt, Fine Gael 2, don't really think so. And then you look at the gap in the market, and what's what I call the Aon O'Riordan gap in the market, whereby whoever in any constituency is just 500,000 votes ahead of a pocket of Soc Dems, Greens and Labour. And I'm looking, in that case, it's Laura Harman, right? Where she might be the one. Now, it could be independent Mick Finn or whatever. But when I went through the constituencies in detail, looking at, okay, so if the Greens are down a bit and Sinn Féin is down a bit, these people are not going to vote Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil. So who might they vote for? And I quickly found, when I went through them, Cork North East, Owen Kenny, Laura Harman, I've referred to, Ivana Bacik, Duncan Smith, Rob O'Donoghue in the other side of Fingal, who I think will win, Dara Moriarty in Dublin South Central, Kieran Ahern in Dublin South West, John Walsh in Dublin West. All these, there's an extra seat. So there's 14 extra seats. Who is going to get these? Mark Wall in Kildare South, Conor Sheehan in Limerick City, Jed Nash in Louth, Alan Kelly in Tipperary North, and Brendan Howland's protege, George Lawler. Now that actually adds up to 13. So say they don't get the bounce of the ball. I can see a scenario, and I'd be the first to say, is there a Labour certainty amongst that list? I think Alan Kelly and Jed Nash are certain, but there are, so they could have a bad day. What I'm saying is this, they could find a pathway to getting back into government. And I'm told by those in the corridors of Leinster House that the Soc Dems aren't really interested in government.
Oh God, are we going to have Holly Kearns back onto us now again?
Well, sorry, they can explain.
She's interested, I'd say, in being part of a left-leaning government, perhaps one led by Sinn Féin.
Sorry, the only show in town might be an FGFF government, which needs a dozen seats. What I'm just saying is this, don't be the first to be surprised when all the counting is done and all the dealing is done, if Labour could get back. So I'm not saying it's going to happen, and it's more dark horse than banker material, but I actually can see a pathway for Labour.
Now that we've mentioned Holly Kearns again, here's a little teaser of what you can get on our subscription edition if you want to go back and hear the stage shows that we did in the Olympia in Dublin and also in the Cork Opera House. Here's a little bit of the interview that we conducted with Holly Kearns in Cork.
What do you think is the unique selling point of the Soc Dems?
I think it's I remember before going into politics, and actually it's not that long ago, that kind of feeling of feeling very unrepresented, and this feeling that politicians would always say what they think you want to hear to try and get your vote, try and buy your vote by giving you back a few euro of your own money in a giveaway budget before an election, this kind of an approach. And just changing with like what way the wind is blowing. Mm-hmm. And I think there is an opening there for a party to just be a bit more straight talking, to not promise the sun, moon and stars, to not try and buy your vote, not engage in auction politics. And that's what the Social Democrats are about. And I think there's an underestimation of the electorate with regard to that, and the kind of smaller parties going into government and not just being upfront about the reality of that and what's going to be at stake and all of those things. And I think that's what sets us apart. I think the most important commodity in politics is trust. And actually there's a big absence of that. And I think the true test of any left-wing party is what they do with power when they get close to it, rather than what they say beforehand, what their policy looks like on a piece of paper. And I think that's why Catherine and Roisin started the Social Democrats. They saw this opening, they felt there wasn't that option for people out there. And I have to say, when I decided to go into politics, it's not ideal. You wouldn't be like, I think I'll join that small party that has so much growing and work to do before, we can really kind of implement our policies and our principles and our practices into reality for our communities. But actually, you have to start at that place where you really align, you really trust that they're going to do what they say they're going to do.
That was Holly Kearns in Cork. If you want to hear that, if you subscribe, you can get an opportunity to listen to the two stage shows and also our weekly podcast, which we do in addition, which is released on a Monday morning for subscribers only. And in the current edition, or the Monday edition forthcoming in this, you can hear us talk about Leo Varadkar's reintervention onto the political stage. Also Michael D. Higgins and what he had to say when he was in New York and what the government made of it. And your questions answered as well. So these are the things that are additional, which you can find on the subscriber edition. And if you want that, all you have to do is go to the Path to Power podcast podcast.com website, and you'll find the details there of how to subscribe on a monthly basis. So,
and if you want to put it also on the extra one, we do, if you have any questions or any mails, we actually do deal with them there.
We do. We absolutely. And of course, if you want to get in touch with us, mail@pathtopowerpodcast.com is where you can get in contact. As I always say,
the second million is the hardest, Matt. What are you going to do with it?
I don't know. I have no idea.
It's alien to spend it.
I have a different lifestyle to you. I have a different lifestyle. I saw these conferences you're doing. Anyway, that's it for this edition of Path to Power. Hope you enjoyed it. Of course, you can get it Apple, Spotify, wherever it is that you get your podcasts. Please recommend to your friend. And as I said, if you want more, there is bonus content available on the subscription edition that's available weekly. So from me, Matt Cooper.
And from me, Ivan Yates.
Thank you very much for being with us.